Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the Walter Allen Memorial Community Lecture. My name is Melita Terry, and I am the Community Engagement Specialist for the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center here at the University of Pittsburgh. The Walter Allen Memorial Community Lecture. This series is named in honor of Walter Allen, a prominent African-American photographer who worked for the New Pittsburgh Courier in the 1950s and 1960s and later died with dementia. The University of Pittsburgh Alzheimer's Disease Research Center has presented over the past several years the Walter Allen Memorial Community Lecture in the Historical Hill District. The series offers a platform that brings researchers and clinical experts to community settings, creating interactive and educational programs on Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias relevant to the African-American community. So at this time, I would like to introduce to you our featured speaker today, our guest speaker, Dr. Patira. Dr. Patira is a fellowship trained and board certified in behavioral neurology and neuropsychiatry. Her clinical and research interests focus on the various cognitive disorders, especially neurodegenerative diseases such as Alzheimer's disease, frontotemporal dementia, and other types of dementia. As an investigator at Alzheimer's Disease Research Center at the University of Pittsburgh, she is involved in clinical research that includes neuropsychological assessments, biomarker studies, and trials involving patients with various types of dementia. She leads the Frontotemporal Dementia Consortium at the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center with research focused on various types of frontotemporal dementia. She also directs the Cognitive Disorders Clinic elective rotations to support a well-rounded and balanced education for medical students, residents, and fellows. It is my pleasure to bring to you Dr. Patira. Dr. Patira, would you please join us?
Thank you for that lovely introduction. So I just want to disclose any conflict of interest. Previously, I have been co-investigator for some clinical trials that we are going to discuss today. So one is Engage, and then second is Emerge. Those were the clinical trials where this drug, Aducanumab, was studied in a phase 3 trial. And as a fellow at Penn, and as faculty at Pitt, I have been involved as co-investigator on these trials. And currently I'm site primary investigator for another study, Embark study, which is also studying the same drug in participants who received it before as the part of the open label extension study. But I have no other financial disclosures in terms of conflict of interest. So first I want to clarify the definitions or terms here, because the most common question I usually get in my clinics is what is the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease? So dementia is a clinical syndrome. By definition, it means that someone has trouble in their cognitive functions to an extent that they need help or assistance. That's it. It doesn't specify what disease it is. So it's an umbrella word, and it has many types. Alzheimer's is the most common type of dementia. And after that, there are others like Lewy body, frontotemporal dementia, vascular dementia, and so on. And then, so the concept of Alzheimer's has changed. Before it was synonymous with dementia, but now we understand dementia is just a stage. So there have been stages of Alzheimer's further classified to help understand the different stages, and also to help research studies, so you can specify where someone is. So by the definitive diagnosis comes when you can see the amyloid plaques and the tau tangles, and those are the hallmark pathological findings in Alzheimer's. And that's how you get your definitive diagnosis. In older times, people used to have to get an autopsy, so they cannot get a definitive diagnosis when they're living. But now we have technological advancements through which you can detect amyloid when someone is living on amyloid PET scans or in their spinal fluid. So now we can define stages of Alzheimer's because we can detect the disease And then by clinical assessments, you can determine the stage. So there are 7 stages. The first 2 stages are preclinical stages. So these green ones are stage 1 and 2. These can linger for like 20 years before the actual symptoms start. So you can nowadays detect plaques 20 years before someone can actually have cognitive changes. So the stage 1 is you have no impairment. Stage 2 is some age-related forgetfulness, but on the formal testing, neuropsych evaluation, there is no objective deficit. And then comes the clinical stages. Stage 3, and stage 3 is mild cognitive impairment. So this is a stage before dementia. When you have cognitive complaints, you might notice memory issues, your family might notice some issues, but there is no functional impairment in day-to-day activities. So patients can do anything they want to do, drive, take care of finances, all those things without any problems. They might have to compensate using some strategies, but they can do it. And then comes the later on stages, stage 4, 5, 6, and 7. These are your dementia stages. And again, in dementia, you have mild, moderate, and severe stages. So now getting on to the topic of this talk, what is Aducanumab? So it is an antibody which binds to both soluble and insoluble forms of amyloid. So there are 2 types of amyloid. One is soluble, which is thought to be the toxic one, and the insoluble one that deposits in form of plaques, fibral plaques, and which can be detected as well. So the good thing is that this binds to the both forms, because some other older generation amyloid therapies didn't bind to the soluble ones. So this comes in 2 types of strengths. And the journey of this drug has been almost like a roller coaster, I think, for everyone, patients, clinicians, getting news from like media, industry, regulators, everyone has been through a journey, I think. So the journey starts with clinical trials that were done to study the drug. These trials, there were 2 trials. They both were identical. So they were sister trials, Engage and Emerge. They had similar amount of subjects as well, as you can see, and their design was also similar. This started in 2015. I mean, the phase 3 trial started in 2015, and there was an amendment done in 2017 where the dose was increased. And this was an important milestone because we are going to come to the next why this become very important milestones in the journey of this drug. That was a slow course. There was no excitement in general there, but finally there was a point in time into March 2019, it was announced by Biogen that they are terminating those 2 studies because of the futility analysis. So in mid of any study, there is a protocol that an independent board studies if the drug is showing any benefit or it should be terminated midway. And there are some assumptions made if the drug achieve its endpoint, if it's going to finish the complete duration of the trial. So using those statistical models, it was thought that drug might not be able to meet the endpoint, and hence they were terminated in between the course of the trial. So that was the downward turn. It was a huge disappointment for everyone, patients, clinicians, investigators, industry. So then Biogen went back and they analyzed their own data, and they saw that one of their study, which was 302, Emerge, met its endpoint. In that the drug was shown some benefit in people who got it as compared to the people who were on placebo. So then Biogen collaborated with FDA to analyze those results during this duration between 2019 and 2020. And between those times, there were also some patient advocacy groups that met with FDA. So these groups were represented by patients and their families who wanted to have a voice heard on what they think should be done in deciding about these drugs in the future. And then finally, the Biogen decides to file for FDA approval. It was being reviewed. There was an outside external advisory panel prepared, which consisted of 11 members, and they voted no to approve this drug through a standard pathway. But the drug went through accelerated pathway, and then the drug was finally approved on June 7, 2021. So that was a big day in the field of this journey. And I'm just trying to move this so everyone can see that. Okay, so after the drug was approved, there has been controversy, which is another goal of this topic. 3 out of 11 FDA advisors have resigned. The Office of Inspector General has started investigations into this process, and they are expected to give a report in 2 years from now. And another company, Eli Lilly, has planned to file for its FDA approval for their own drug, Aducanumab, which has not gone through any phase 3 trial. It had went through phase 2 trials so far. So there are many stakeholders in this journey, right? There are patients, clinicians, clinical societies, healthcare facilities like hospitals and clinics. There is industry, there are payers, insurance companies, Medicare, because of the population that belongs to this group is mostly elderly, FDA and other regulators. There are academicians like researchers, scientists, ethicists, and policymakers, public advocacy groups that are composed of patients, their representatives, as well as some nonprofit citizen groups as well. And there are some other nonprofits who also have stake in this journey, like Alzheimer's Association and other societies. So today I'm just gonna cover one stakeholder, viewpoint of one, which is patient. As a clinician, I'm just gonna cover what are the common questions I get from them and how would I answer those to my patients to do my due diligence. So the first most common question I get is, am I eligible for this drug? So let's tackle that. So like I mentioned before, there are many stages of Alzheimer's disease. The drug Aduhelm was studied in these 2 stages, mild cognitive impairment and mild dementia. So these are the early stages. You might have heard from the media reports where the drug was approved. I mean, the initial FDA label was broad. It was for everyone who has Alzheimer's or diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but then it was modified due to confusion, and then it was restricted to this group. So unfortunately, some of my patients who are in advanced stages are not good patients, are not eligible to get this treatment. So there are some guidelines now in place on who should get the drug, because it's not the stage. There are many other criteria. So the actual population who would be eligible or who are good patients, it's much narrower than the broad population that suffers from this cruel disease. So the actual, the criteria in the study were different, but it's hard to replicate those in real world. So there were some modifications made in the recommendations from the experts on who should be eligible. So there is no clear age cutoff. The clinical criteria has to be mild disease, MCI, or mild AD dementia. Now in the trial, there were much more extensive batteries done to know who is in mild stage. In clinics, it's difficult for doctors to incorporate such extensive testing. So there are 2 brief screens that can be used to make some speculation about the age of stage of the patient. And then you need to have confirmation someone has Alzheimer's. So it can be done in 2 ways. One, you get amyloid PET scan that shows you have amyloid pathology in the brain or the plaques. And then second is a spinal tap. So on spinal tap, you can see those biomarkers as well. We have been always not very aggressive in doing such testing before to get a definitive diagnosis because of the barriers from insurance. They would argue, why would we pay for it if it's not going to change the management? So that might change in future now, because now there might be management that will change. And then genetic testing. So in the trials, when the drug was studied, the patients were stratified according to their ApoE status, meaning people who carry the risk genes for Alzheimer's, 1 or 2 copy from parents, and people who don't have such risk genes. And it was noticed that there might be more benefit in people who have these risk genes, but also they are more susceptible to the side effect. So the genotyping might also become a common test to be done. Right now, it's not part of the recommendations from many societies, but once we have final rules from the insurance and the payers, rules might change. And then finally, neurological examination to rule out other types of dementia or neurological disorders. And then someone should be really stable from their other medical issues. So someone having active cancers, cardiac issue, lung issue, medical issues, they might not be eligible for this drug. And finally, people who are on the blood thinners for, let's say, Coumadin, for their heart conditions or blood clots, they will also not be eligible. But people who are taking aspirin and Plavix or such mild blood thinners will be eligible. And then, as you can see, people need to have a baseline MRI. So patients who have pacemakers that are not compatible with MRIs or other implants, they will also not be eligible for the drug itself. So you need to be able to do the MRI, and not just baseline MRIs, but serial MRIs that we are gonna cover today. And then in the trial, we wanted that there has to be consistent support system, but in the real life, that's going to be difficult. Technically, anyone who lives alone will be eligible, but that's another risk management that we have to tackle, because we need to monitor for the side effect. And then finally, consent. We need to understand, and we need to make sure that the patients and their families do understand all their benefit and the risk before they start any such treatments. So that was all about who is eligible. And then, does it work? So, so the data we have is the data that has been released from the company Biogen. The paper has not been published. There were some outcomes that were part of the battery of the tests that were done, pen and pencil testing, and some questionnaires. These were those questionnaires and the test. This one, CDR, sum of boxes, was the primary outcome. And then there were secondary outcomes. So as you can see in these graphs, if you focus here and you see the colors, the gray one are placebo groups and the purple ones are the high dose groups. And in the primary outcome, you see the difference splits when the trial was terminated. And there was this difference between placebo group and the high dose group. So patients still progressed. Their CDR score did go up, but it seemed it was slower than the placebo group. And there was similar observations in the other outcomes as well. But it was the primary outcome on the basis of which it's decided it's a positive study. So this was the 302 study, one of them, but the other didn't show exactly the same graphs. In this other study, Engage, the drug group, as you can see purple here, the difference between the drug group and the placebo group was not statistically. So hence it did not mean its endpoint. And then similarly, the other endpoints, the secondary endpoints also did not meet its statistical significance. So that was about clinical outcome and how we can measure clinically if someone has slower decline. But when it comes to the biomarkers, it was seen that in both studies, the drug did remove the amyloid plaques. So we do know for sure that the drug does work against the amyloid. And that was consistent across both studies as well. So what happened after the studies were done and when it was analyzed with FDA, because usually FDA requires 2 clinical trials to meet their endpoints for a drug to be approved through their standard process. And because only one study met its endpoint, the other did not, they went back and studied why that was seen, and if there's an explanation for it. So there was some post hoc analysis done. And in this, it was what they did is they took away the low dose group and just included the high dose group. So this is the lower graphs here is the high dose group. The above graphs here are the normal groups without any adjustment that was seen. So as you can see here, when they adjusted just for the high dose groups, the graphs became similar in both studies. So the dose group and the placebo group split it by good amount, and there was a significant change. So this was one explanation. But the counter argument for these kind of post hoc analysis was that, as you can see, when the graph shifted, you see the placebo group, the gray ones, it seemed like they were declining faster, right? So it seemed it was more of a modeling assumption due to which we see the changes, not the actual truth in the study. So there are some counter arguments why there might be other explanations towards these kind of findings. And there were some other arguments as well, meaning the emerge group had some rapid progressors, but the statistician from the FDA group, they mentioned that these rapid progressors, so-called rapid progressors, did not have any major impact on the study results. So that was about, that's a long answer to know if it works, but the short answer is we don't know. And we need more evidence. We need more data to make sure that it works. And side effects. So there were side effects observed in the drug group. So this was the high dose group, and the data is the cumulative data from the FDA's drug label for Aducanumab. The main side effect was ARIA, which stands for unregulated. You can see 50% of patients in high dose group. So 1 out of 3 people got this ARIA. And it was more in people who carry the risk gene carriers. And people who don't have this gene, they had a little bit lower risk, but they still had 1 in 5 chances of getting ARIA. And there are 2 types of ARIA. The numbers we discussed right now was ARIA-E, which is swelling. And the other type of ARIA is hemorrhage or bleeding. It sounds bad, but bleeding means it can come in many forms. It can be a large bleed, or it can be small micro bleeds, or it can be just blood product deposition on the brain. So those are the 3 flavors in which we saw the side effect. So the micro bleeds happen in almost 19-20% of the high dose patients group. 15% had those deposition. So not a major bleed, but they were blood products when the drug pulls off the amyloid. And then a very small percentage of patients had major bleed. And the majority of the patients, so at least 40% patient had either one or the other, so 2/5. But the majority of them, 80% of them, so total of 30% of patients had no symptoms of this ARIA. So those were detected on the MRIs that were done as part of the monitoring. And only 10% of the total patients developed symptomatic ARIA. So they actually had symptoms. And these symptoms, most common side effect of ARIA is headache. So headache occurred in a lot of patients with ARIA and without ARIA. And there were some other side effects as well in the patients group. So falls, wedges, inflammation in nose and those areas, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, and confusion. These ARIA episodes, they were temporary, and they usually resolve in 4 to 16 weeks. So patients who get the ARIA, their doses are withheld, and then they have more MRIs to make sure that it resolves. And once their ARIA is resolved, then they had resumed infusions without any side effects. So in study itself, they had much more aggressive monitoring. In clinical practice, that might be difficult to do. There are some guidelines on how many MRIs have to happen. The FDA label is different from this recommendation, but this recommendation is coming from an expert panel. So there has to be a baseline MRI. And then there has to be MRI anytime if you suspect the ARIA has occurred. And there has to be one before 5th dose, 7th dose, 12th dose. But the difference between the FDA guideline and this one is this 5th dose MRI. So at least someone has to have 3 MRIs. The first baseline one, before the 7th dose, and before the 12th dose. Because before the 7th is when you go to the high doses. So if someone has baseline MRI, and if they are serial MRIs, and if ARIA is ever detected, if they are symptomatic, the doses are stopped, infusions stop, they get serial MRIs every month. And once the ARIA resolves, the treatment can be resumed with the drug. People who have no symptoms, then it depends how bad the ARIA looks. If it's moderate to severe, then again, it follows the same protocol as if someone has symptoms. You wait for someone to have complete resolution of ARIA, and then you resume the infusions. But if it's very mild, no symptoms, then you can continue the infusions, and you can just do monthly MRIs to make sure that they are not having any further progression. Because cost. So that's a major point of debate in this drug's journey. So the price tag for this drug, according to Biogen, is around $56,000, which is a maintenance cost. It might be lower in the first year, but that's the maintenance for someone who is around 74 kilograms. That's per patient per year. There is a nonprofit, ICR, that also did their own analysis for cost benefit effectiveness for this drug. And they had several assumptions and modeling models on how they can value a drug and what are the other risks to concerns, and compare with the support systems that they have. Then they put a price tag around $3,000 to $8,400 per year per patient. And they also just gave their final report in August, where they also gave several recommendations to all the stakeholders on how they should tackle this infusions and how they should respond to the drug and management. Now, when patients ask me, they are usually assuming that that's the only cost they have to pay. So the problem is there will be additional cost for the infusions they're gonna get, the facilities or centers where they're gonna get the infusions, personnel, doctors, nurses, technicians, who are gonna do the work for infusions and management, MRIs that have to happen for monitoring spinal taps. PET scans can be expensive, and there can be other tests like blood work or genetic testing needed in some cases. So we don't know the exact cost because so much of that depends upon each individual's insurance, where they are, like a lot of other factors that we don't know. But it's estimated it might be as much as the drug itself. So the actual price tag might be around $100,000 per year per patient. And most of these patients who are in this age group are Medicare beneficiaries. And many of them have no supplemental insurance. And unfortunately, because it's an infusion, it's going to be Part B of Medicare drugs plan. And Part B drugs are usually not capped. Now, in incoming agenda for Biden's bill, the Part D drugs might be capped, but there is no, in short horizon, we don't see that there has to be any capping. So the out-of-pocket expenses can go quite high. And there are some patients who are on Medicare Advantage, and also they have very high out-of-pocket maximums. So right now, we don't know if Medicare will cover the drug. The Medicare is doing its national coverage determination. They are going to propose what they will do in April of 2022. So next year, in a few months, they will decide if they are going to cover, how much, duration, and there might be some renewal criteria that may put down. So we will know more about the rules when we have to prescribe these drugs. So I just want to finally summarize, like, what can you do? What can patient and their loved ones do in this situation? So just speak up, just have your voice heard everywhere, to clinical societies, to patients advocacy groups, to write to your Congress, write to Senate. So just have your voice heard in what you want to say, because a lot of this previous public advocacy groups might have a voice of people who are more informed, or who might be a little bit more different in their approach, might be more aggressive, but there might be some other voices that are not heard on how they want to do this. So that's So that's important that we hear everyone. And then after CMS will decide if Medicare will cover the drug and give us the rules, they will open their website to a 30-day public commenting period. So you can go on their website, which will be in this link, and you can post what you want and give your comments. So your voice is heard at that platform. And after that 30-day of period commenting period, they're gonna close and they're gonna make their final decision. And ultimately, you should just have very clear, in-depth discussion with your treating physician about what you want, what are you seeking, what are your goals, and the risks you're willing to take medically and financially. And you should just have that shared decision-making process with your physician. And finally, there are some general things. Sometimes they sound very cheesy, right? But sometimes these might have huge impact as much as the drug itself. So you should also take care of yourself. There are things you can do. Eat healthy. There are two types of diet that might be helpful: Mediterranean diet and diabetic diet. Exercise every day, at least 4 to 5 times per day. Some kind of aerobic exercise for at least 30 minutes. Be active, not just physically, but also mentally. So spend some time on some cognitively stimulating activities, and then have a good routine. It has to be a structured routine each day with good sleep incorporated into the routine. And then there are support groups you can reach out to, take care of your safety and monitoring that needs to be done at home. Plan early for your finances, for your legal affairs, so you have full control of the situation. And then just take care of yourself and reach out for help. Often I see when patients and their caregivers come, the hardest part is to know when to reach out for help. So I think that's really important to think about and to do. And in the end, I just wanna mention some links here, which might be interesting to read. These are from different stakeholders here. And you can read about the meeting that occurred with FDA review. And then finally, the drug labels. You can read more about the drug and the side effect. The investigations that have been going on since then. You can read ICR's final report on this link, because they have given a lot of good recommendations to everyone, all the stakeholders. And then there is a financial assistance program in place and a support service at Biogen's website for patients who might qualify for some assistance from the price tag. So that's where I want to end. And I want to thank everyone here, not just as a doctor, I feel very privileged to take care of my patients. Some jobs are thankless, but this is not. And I appreciate that. And also to research participants who come to ADRC and who give their valuable time and advance the science. So with that, I'm just gonna open forum. I'm gonna stop sharing and open forum for questions.
Thank you, Dr. Patira. Thank you so much. This was very informative. We do have a couple of questions that have come in during your presentation. And the first question is, since most Alzheimer's patients are elderly and many elderly patients are on Eliquis or other blood thinners, is this drug helpful or viable for them?
Yes, unfortunately, they won't be eligible if they are on warfarin, Eliquis, Xarelto, apixaban, so dabigatran. So those kind of the drugs are considered anticoagulants, so-called strong blood thinners, and it is a contraindication because they are higher risk of bleeding or ARIA or hemorrhage in their brain. If you're on aspirin and Plavix, it's okay. Antiplatelets are okay, but anticoagulants, but we don't want someone to stop their Eliquis or warfarin just to get the drug, especially if they're taking for something like pulmonary embolism or atrial fibrillation. So I think that's another issue. I just don't want someone to incentivize to stop their blood thinners to be able to get this drug.
Great, great. And so we have another question. What are examples of good stimulating cognitive activities?
I mean, so much research is done. And as always, we always need more research. There were a lot of games and apps, but nothing panned out much. So it's very much individual based. Something that stimulates your brain, your mind is much more helpful. For many people, it's crosswords, reading, puzzles. For some people, it's creative stuff like music and art. So sometimes it also depends upon the stage. So every person have their own verbal skills and creative skills and hobbies and what stimulates them. But as the disease progresses, the stage also changes, and you cannot always do what you can do. So rather than being stimulating, it can become stressful. And sometimes caregivers keep trying and keep trying. Mom, read the book. Mom, read the paper. And it's just, it's just not possible. So then we just scale it down and we just do what we can do to stimulate someone. If someone doesn't want to read, we sit to them, we talk to them, take a walk, hear music, things like that. So it's a process. I think there are many programs that are being studied by some pet investigators here to know what kind of routine they should have, what kind of activities and what duration they should have, and how to change that based on the individual hobby and their interest and abilities.
So I hear you saying it really is based on an individual basis, based on interest and abilities and hobbies, correct? Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much for that answer. Another question that came up is frontotemporal dementia considered within the MCI or mild dementia stages?
So that's another issue. FTD, disease and dementia is not the same. Technically, FTD is not a disease, it's FTLD. So any FTD researcher will not use that word. They would say frontotemporal lobar degeneration. That's same as saying Alzheimer's disease. So they are completely separate, Alzheimer's disease and FTLD. FTD, frontotemporal dementia, is a clinical syndrome, which means someone has personality change, that they might have FTLD, but sometimes Alzheimer's can present as FTD, or the behavioral variant of Alzheimer's disease. And the stages I discussed previously, the MCI and the dementia, they are applicable to Alzheimer's disease, not FTLD, and not even FTD, which is Alzheimer's. So they are different things. And we don't have exact same staging system for FTLD.
Great. Excuse me. Thank you so much. I have a question, and I'm just curious to know, this is your opinion on what you feel could be some challenges as far as it relates to the African-American community with this drug.
No, definitely that's another issue. So first of all, we do know they might have higher burden of the disease. There are some studies that show that African-American and Hispanic populations might have higher plaque burden and even symptoms. So like the problem is even magnified for them, right? So that's one. Biologically, they are
Dr. Patira?
It impacts them. And also there is,
I'm sorry, if you wouldn't mind going back probably about 3 sentences,
okay.
Your camera froze, if that's okay. So I want to make sure that our audience has an opportunity to hear your response. Thank you.
Sure. So I was saying that there is evidence that they might have higher biological disease burden. So it's not just a social construct, it's a biological thing that they might have more magnified disease process going on there. So that's about the disease. Second is diagnosis. Often they might not get as much early diagnosis as other populations, and it's too late in terms of stages. When they seek medical care for so many reasons, then they are out of that qualification for the drug. So we need to do a better job to reach out to them. First of all, they're not even well represented in the research, all these clinical trials that were done. So that needs to be done. So we know more. And then in the healthcare systems have to also do a better job in reaching out to them. Once we learn and once we get them into the system, at right stages, then another issue is how we do provide better care for them, because now comes the lack of support systems they have. So when it comes to the insurance and other problems, they might have more high pockets and out-of-pocket insurances and other lack of system. And that creates an equity issue here. Because if that's an issue, people who might be able to afford the out-of-pocket cost or who are able to pay for the drug, they might get ahead in the line, right? And then that's not fair to the system. So that's another problem we have here. No easy solution, but I would say that everyone has to work together in this and make sure that there is equity and inclusion, and we involve everyone in this process.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have another question, and I'm going to take this question on because we have an attendee who was asking if this session will be recorded. And yes, we are in the process of recording, and it will be available within the next week or two for viewing. And we will send it out to the attendees who are attending, who missed this particular talk to the community. Just curious if you have any other things that you wanted to share regarding the drug as it relates to, just your expertise. And I know you've been following this very closely for quite some time. Is there any additional things that you wanted to share with our audience today?
I think a lot of times patients come to me looking for hope. And as much as I wish I can give hope, sometimes you have to, be honest with them. But these kind of issues and innovations are making me optimistic. I'm hopeful that we might have more drugs to come. And I think the competition might also help, to lower down the prices. And I'm also hopeful that this will trigger a lot of science, research, and funding, so we can have more drugs, more treatments, and we can utilize these resources to take care of the health systems, because right now the memory centers, they can't afford good care. Like we can't, there's no money in the system. So we need to do better job. And we are hopeful that there will be more effort here. And there is a lot of interest, but we have to find effective treatments to really make a difference here. So I just want to share that I'm hopeful. I have to be hopeful for the rest 30 years in this field. So that's what I'm looking forward to. And also not just treatments, maybe these treatments, if we have doubts about their efficacy, they are at least pushing the field of diagnostics. Therapeutics are coming before the diagnostics. And now there's huge rush to find blood tests for Alzheimer's or some other cheaper ways to have mass testing. So that's what also I'm hopeful for in future.
Great. Great. Thanks so much for sharing that. We had a couple of more questions come in, and I would like to ask those questions to you. Ellen would like to know, are there other drugs in the pipeline that work in a similar fashion?
So Aducanumab is another antibody that Eli Lilly is planning to file for FDA approval, which they're planning to do by the end of this year. That drug went through phase 2 trial, not phase 3 trial. So that's another issue. We even have less data for that drug than what we have for this drug. But that's the next one. And after that, there are some few other companies who have actually made some public announcement that they are increasing their R&D efforts to bring out their Alzheimer's drug into the pipeline, which just does not work on amyloid, but also works on some other targets. So those are the other ones. And I think Biogen also have some other drugs in pipeline as well.
Great, great. And if you wouldn't mind just kind of going over the 30-day public comment period. You mentioned something about that towards the end of your presentation. And we would also like to know, how effective are the public comments to decision makers?
I don't even know if I have ability to answer that. We sometimes tend to think that as clinicians, we think we do, but we don't. There was a very famous study done of public can make differences in policies. A very famous study done, I think by Hopkins or someone. If a public votes no, it has a 50-50 chance to become a public policy. If they say yes, same statistical chance. But if it comes from lobbying group and other groups, if they want to say no, it won't happen. If they say yes, then 70% chance. I might be missing some numbers out there, but I don't know. To be honest, I don't know. I can speculate, but I think if I speculate, that might be wrong. But I hope so. I mean, at least we should still speak up, right? I mean, we have nothing to lose. We should still express ourselves. Those public comments are visible to everyone. You can actually read the comments before this process started. So there was another 30-day period in July when everyone commented. It was not just public. Doctors, behavioral neurologists, my colleagues, they commented, researchers commented what they feel. So you can still go on their website and read those. So you get a gist of what everyone is thinking. But based on what Medicare does, there might be a difference in opinion now. So I would just encourage everyone to go, regardless of what happens, whether or not it's heard or not, we should still do that.
Great. I think that's great advice. Definitely to provide comments. To your point, you never know, where it may land.
Someone mentioned this is very disheartening to hear. I'm sorry. I do have a tendency to, I think when I mentioned that study and what impact public comments, I think someone wrote, this is disheartening to hear. I broke someone's heart. So sorry, I do that pretty much every day when I discuss this kind of diagnosis and, be candid with them. But we don't know. I mean, when we fight for a change, we do know change does happen. And biggest power is in public comment. So I do, again, want to be hopeful that we can make a difference, even though we don't have evidence that it.
Let's see, I think we have one more question. Is it possible to quantify in terms we understand the difference in decline in a patient from placebo to full dose patients in the study?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. It reads, is it possible to quantify in terms that the audience can understand the difference in decline in a patient from placebo to full dose patients in the study?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that's a very important question for clinicians. What is minimum clinically important difference? So how do you measure cognition? Brain is a black box. So that's a big challenge. At least we have now one scale where we have, so this primary endpoint, CDR, was a composite measure on how someone does in battery of tests and day-to-day function. It's not just important how someone does on pen and pencil, that's artificial, right? It's also important what they do in their day-to-day function. So this was a composite score. And on this scale, it ranges from 1 to 18. And on this scale, the difference between the drug and the placebo was 0.39 in emerge group. So let's say 0.4. Is 0.4 significant? Again, there was one paper in a psychiatry journal. They say clinicians want to see at least 1 point difference on this scale to think it's significant. But there's no consensus out there about how much is important. And that's another thing to measure. I think if we are going to do these drugs, we should have well monitored registries where everyone is registered and monitored like a research database, and their outcomes are measured well. So down the line, we can see what's the actual difference in outcomes. Then we'll know better. So right now the reference was 0.4. We don't know if this is gonna go like this or it's gonna go like this. But I don't know if 0.4, for some people, 0.4 might not sound big. For some person, maybe for one person, it might make a difference between driving or not driving. So.
A lot to take in, definitely a lot to take in. Dr. Patira, we thank you so much for your presentation and very informative presentation on this drug that we've been waiting so long, for a breakthrough to come through, and some of the information that that you disclosed has been, I won't say disheartening as one said, but I think to think of things on an upswing, we have something that is very close, but yet so far. So that's the silver lining in it all. And again, on behalf of the ADRC, we thank you, and the community, we thank you today for taking the time to share your knowledge about this drug, Aduhelm.
Sure, thank you for having me. It was a privilege to be here.
You're very much welcome. We thank you for attending the Fall Walter Allen Memorial Community Lecture. And please keep your eyes and ears open for the spring 2022 series of the Walter Allen Memorial Community Lecture. Thank you, and have a wonderful rest of your week.